Brilliant. Okay, so welcome again, everyone, and thank you for all being so prompt and on time this morning. My name's Bex. I am Digital Transformation Manager here at Wagga Digital. I've been with the company now for about 3.5 years, and I head up our digital transformation team that manage web developments and also all of our HubSpot implementations as well. So it's definitely not all about me. We've got a big team in Wagga Digital spread across 3 offices now. So some of you, if you've been to our webinars before, would have spoken to Dan, who's based over in our Cheltenham office. Matt and I are over in the St Albans office, and then we've just recently opened an office in London as well, which is being headed up by Ellie on our social team. So we are well spread out, and everybody's got their own kind of passions and specialisms, from SEO through to content marketing to PR, and obviously in my team, the web development and the HubSpot side as well. That brings me quite nicely on to introduce your speaker to today, Mr. Matt Cooley. I will say, when you see him come on the screen, he doesn't look anything like that picture anymore, and we definitely need to sort out headshots. But yeah, Matt, I'll hand over to you and you can talk about modern web designs for 2024.
Hello and welcome everybody. My name's Matt. I work as part of the website development team. As I said, I direct projects through from the kickoff to the launch, working in both the web design side of things and the web development side. Welcome everybody, and hopefully everybody's sat on a cushion and comfortable, ready for our web design webinar. Today, delving into web design, we're going to cover some of the key areas which will hopefully give you some actionable practices and a toolkit to improve your web design process. We'll start with how we prepare for your web design project. Initially looking at researching and understanding before putting anything into pen and paper. I use pen and paper metaphorically, but often I do start with a notepad when I'm beginning a new design. We'll cover a few different tips as well that can help elevate those designs. And then towards the end, we'll look at some useful tools that we find really helpful when designing. Hopefully this kind of all sounds good to you guys. And we'll crack on into the first section. Well, I'd like to begin very close to the beginning, before we kind of start thinking about what shade of orange we're going to use in our design and how many pixels we're going to have in our font spacing. We need to be prepared for our setup. As with most things, kind of good planning often results in a strong outcome. So web design greatly benefits from understanding the requirements for what your build will be. As designing websites can often take quite a long time. And if you get to the end stage, you haven't met brand guidelines, you haven't met the functionality requirements, it doesn't align with what the stakeholders want out of the design, it can be a waste of your time. So it can be avoided by putting in that preparation and research work to start with. In the first instance, adhering to the expression user-centered design, which will probably crop up quite a lot during this webinar, we'll start with the audience. Who are you building your website for? And I believe Bex put this quote in, what is their quest, for any Monty Python fans there.
It does make sense. We do need to understand who the audience are, but also what they're trying to do. And it just made me giggle. So apologies if anybody isn't a Monty Python fan.
I love a bit of Monty Python. So your audience, you want to understand them to understand how you're going to design around them. It's best to have personas wherever possible. And you can ask for these, get them from the companies you're working with. Get them from the stakeholders involved, and document them. Think about who you want to attract to the website, and think about what they're like. You also think about what their time management might be for busy people. Busy business leaders might want things like clear snippets of information, clean journeys throughout sites, things like that. A younger generation might want exciting, dynamic websites to hold their attention. So it's just those kind of things that we're looking at with the audience, and it can very much dictate what we put into the web design aspects. So you want to draw them to their desired action, given your audience the journey that they most like to follow. Next, we're considering whether our audience has any specific requirements. Perhaps they're hunting for information and need a search functionality. Perhaps they are looking for a calming experience when they come onto their website, where if you use bold and intense colors, anything like that, it's going to jar their progress on the website. And all this information, discuss it with the stakeholders involved and make sure you're documenting this as you go along. Having those personas in the first instance, when you come to the design platform, you'll be amazed with how easily it can lead your design as you are developing. So a big topic when we're looking at the audience is the requirement of accessibility. Accessibility within web design often falls under web development side of things and their practices. There's a lot of things that will need to go into the back end of web development to make a site accessible. But there are many things that we can account for when we get to the design stage. This can include things like color contrasting. We've got a useful tool coming up at the end looking at color contrast to make that process a little bit easier. Considering readable fonts and layouts, and also simple navigations. Getting it in at this design stage will massively help the web developers as well. They'll be really pleased that when they build the site, it's kind of set up ready for them to implement their accessibility requirements.
Matt, just a quick question in the
Yes.
chat here, and it probably makes sense. What's a tap target? You just mentioned that we needed to think about tap targets, and it's on there.
Tap target.
So tap target, Cheryl, for you is thinking about where you place buttons next to each other. So if you haven't got enough space, you're not going to have enough that people that particularly with accessibility problems within their hands and things aren't going to be able to tap on things properly. So it's about thinking about space in your designs and making sure that actually you're not just cramming everything together. Does that answer your question? Does that help? I'm just watching this tap over here as well.
Excellent. Sorry, yes, tap targets. It's especially comes into fruition when you're looking at mobile design. So when you're looking at mobile navigations, obviously font sizes tend to decrease. The space between links tends to decrease. So it's making sure that you have that spacing correctly so that when people are tapping, they can easily get to the links that they want to get to.
And I think when we're thinking about accessibility, it's been a big kind of topic with a lot of our clients recently. Obviously in public sector and government funded, I think there's some of you in the room that are working kind of government funded organizations. Obviously you need to be really accessible and it's kind of a requirement of your website, but more and more we're finding as people are thinking more about the audience that they're trying to get to, they are thinking more about their requirements in terms of, as Matt said, color contrast is massive. We work with some care homes and things who, if people can't read what's on their website because they're a little bit older, then the website's not going to do what it needs to do. So right at the beginning of your design, I think it's really important to think about your audience and then go back and go, right, what are they going to be able to see? Have they got hearing difficulties? Do I need to think about things like closed captions, as well as Matt says, tap targets, font sizing, all of those basics there that you're going to need to think about with accessibility. It's a really important part of your design process and working with your developer, because we hear it quite a lot here.
It's a great point. Yeah, you building for your audience, consider what will be useful to them. At the same time, it's always great to get the basic accessibility requirements in there. We want to build websites into the future that everybody can use, and it's not just available for a select few. In terms of some support options there's a great tool, the Wave Chrome extension for anybody using Chrome. That will give an insight once you're on a website into where the potential accessibility errors are coming up there. It will run through the more web development side of things, so like semantic HTML and bits like that. But it will also showcase the design aspects as well and where certain sites are going wrong. So it's well worth picking up a few sites, implementing the Chrome extension and just having a look through yourself.
We'll send the deck over at the end as well, so you'll all have all the links.
And users will leave websites if it doesn't have the accessibility that they require. So if that becomes a big part of your audience, then you're going to potentially lose a lot of traffic there. As an example, maybe if you're designing a site for an optician's, you don't want tiny red font on a big white background, because nobody's kind of going to be able to read it and get to the end outcome that they want from the website.
So just before you move on, Matt, a couple
Yes.
of questions again through here. Does accessibility impact SEO rankings, which I think you're going to talk about a little bit anyway, but go on.
A little bit later on. It does. It's becoming more and more into fruition, and accessibility, for the most part, is built around structuring sites properly. And when Google comes to look at websites, it's looking at things like structure. So strong websites that have a strong accessibility functionality to them tend to rank better because they're adhering to those principles that aligns with how Google wants websites to show and rank. So yes, it definitely has an impact on SEO. Yeah.
And a lot of accessibility basics are things that we also say are SEO basics. So things like adding alt text for screen readers also acts as alt text for Google. So there's it's quite nuanced, but in answer to your question, yes, it does have a little bit of a ranking, Christina. Michael, you're just asking, is it best to design for mobile first? And I know Matt's getting onto that later, so hold on to your hat. That's all I'll say with that one.
It's coming. It's coming. Okay, so once we look at the audience, another big point to note is when you're designing, what is the audience used to seeing? There are a lot of websites out there that appear to be quite similar, and they're kind of set up that way for a reason, because as people search through the internet, they are used to seeing certain aspects in certain places. Consider e-commerce sites. The majority of them will have things like you will also be interested in sections and review sections attached to product pages. They do that because it works, and because people know to expect it and to look for it. So when you're designing, it's not always wise to go so far outside of the box. You can review things like your competitor websites, have a look at what they're doing, and build according to that layout. Don't be afraid of kind of copying aspects and layouts from the competitors and what the industry is doing. Just because you want a design that stands out. There are other ways to make the design stand out whilst retaining a layout that is going to allow people to utilize your site functionally. And after we look at what they are used to using, we're looking at what they are using. So coming back to Michael's question about designing for mobile, when we're designing for websites, we have to account for multiple devices. There's a roughly 60% worldwide market share for users on the internet via mobile devices. So there's a transition to mobile first design, which essentially is emphasizing the experience on mobile first before moving to different screen sizes, and usually transpires to setting a strong mobile foundation and progressively adding more features and content for larger screen sizes. Whilst this is a great starting point, we don't always see this to be the case when we are looking at projects. When we have access to the data for a previous website, if we're doing a rebuild, we often look at what the most used device is for that agency, and design according to that, or plan according to that. So you want to consider what the primary device might be. And that's also looking at the audience as well, where the audience is most likely to be researching. Often B2B is a lot desktop based. So when you're designing, you can consider what your primary audience is, and adhere plan according for that screen size. Doesn't essentially mean that you're only building on that screen size, because we still have to account for multiple screen sizes. It just directs how we focus our design priorities and where we kind of build first. To give an example, if you're looking at more desktop audiences, which are usually running through faster connections, we might plan in heavier video content, where we know it's going to load quicker and there's less users running through 4G or 5G data. Or if it's very much a mobile first build, we might start looking at adding more intensive animations for the navigations and stuff to make the mobile experience more enjoyable for those users. But we are always accounting for multiple screen sizes. And it's great to keep this in mind throughout your design process. A little kind of tip for this, or a setup that I do, is when I build my framework for design, I lay out all the different screen sizes that I plan to use. Not all the different ones, because you're never going to account for everything, but I put in a range of screen sizes, which will give me a strong representation for how my designs are going to appear on different devices. I generally start a setup with the desktop at 1440 pixels, tablet at 834, and mobile at 390. That gives a pretty fair representation of how the design will look across. And it does mean, as you're building, if you set up from the start, it's a constant reminder that you need to account for each of these screen sizes. And as you're working, you can test across multiple as you go. So that's looking at the audience, looking at what the users might be looking for on the website, and looking at what devices they might be using. In practice, we're not only designing for our users. While we use a user-centered design process, there are other stakeholders that we need to consider when we're building. Company and branding is a big one. So when you start designing, you're going to usually, often you will be designing within a framework. So if you have brand guidelines available, definitely reach out for them, get them and read them. What I like to do with brand guidelines is, when I go through them, I'll highlight the key points that are going to affect my design, put them into my workspace so I can use them as a reference throughout my design process. And that's a good way to stay on top of them. Further to that, you're going to be wanting to get all your assets ready and prepped before you start designing. So requesting high quality company assets like logos, brands, and fonts. Get these set up on your system and ready to go before you start building. We will generally build a brand foundation. We'll look at the platform this is working in a little bit later on, but this is a basic example of how we'll set up a brand foundation. It shows some key points that are going to help throughout our design. And there's a few little bits in here that'll help you design and help the web developers moving forward as well. The color samples here, you can see we've got kind of a sample, a name, and the hex code in here. With the naming conventions for colors, try and keep them unique. Try and keep them based on the intent that color is going to be used for. For example, in here, I don't know if this is too small to see, but this top one is our primary color. So we know that that's going to be the primary usage color throughout the website. Then we have things like surface colors, on surface colors, on inverse surface colors. That will great. I mean, your web developers will be grateful if you hand that over to them as well, because when you're designing websites, it means you can use all these setups globally, and they can build them into the foundation of the website as well. And everybody's using the same color profiles. If we look at typography, we've got a scale here that we tend to use to start with. It's a great starting point. It is quite intensive, or extensive rather. We wouldn't generally use all of these within a design. So as I run through, I tend to condense this down to keep in the primary ones that I'm going to use. When you see type scales like this, they're often run in heading 1, heading 2, down to heading 6. As a recommendation, we would avoid those. They tend to be a reference to HTML H tags, which are used for our web page. If we look at SEO practices, they utilize H tags to understand page structure. And it becomes a big thing when you're writing content, what title is in your H1, what titles are in your H2s, and so on. Using this structure allows you to separate the styling of titles against the HTML markup there. Other references that we put in here are potentially icon packs. So if you have specific icons, get them set up in here, and anything else really that you want ready and available when designing, get it all set up to start with, and that'll save you time and make your design process a lot more efficient.
Matt, just looking at that, there's quite a lot of, you've obviously got a lot of font sizes, you've got a lot of colors as well. Generally, if you're trying to either work out something for a brand or when you're designing a website, how many is kind of your maximum colors, and how many fonts do you think you should use for usability and just so it doesn't look too jumbled, really?
Great question. We would tend to use a couple of primary colors, and then a couple of secondary colors. A lot of the remainders come out as supporting colors. So there's a lot of variations of what looks like similar colors here. And often you'll have your main ones, which are actually color differential. So the primary colors of the brand, the secondary colors of the brand. And then we use a kind of a series of fallback colors to accentuate different parts of the design. This, again, is a intensive list, as Bex has kind of noted there. So when I'm designing, I will tend to remove a lot of these that I don't think I'll need. I tend to have you have your blacks and your whites, and then a offset, black and white, so a slight variation of that. And I put in the inverse colors into here. The reason I do separate these out so much, so I've got surface, inverse surface, surface variant, inverse surface variant, is when I'm designing and including these colors, I'll match them up to the intent that they're working on the website. That means when I create my design, I have a global reference point for all of these colors, and I can change from a central point one of these colors and know where it needs to change across my design. If I'm putting colors in very specifically, I can very easily lose place of which colors I've used where. Does that answer your question, Bex?
It wasn't my question, but yes, it definitely does. Answer somebody else's question as well. Thanks, Matt.
Once we've looked at setting the brand foundation, we can consider design parties, which sadly is not the balloon and cake kind of parties, although this should definitely be considered later. But it's who will be reviewing your design. It's important that you take their ideas and insights into account, document these, because you don't want to get to the end of the design and be completely in the wrong direction from the stakeholders who are going to be signing you off at the end of the process. If you're able to speak with the teams building the websites as well, I'd strongly advise doing this and asking them if they have any requirements for the design, as it will greatly affect their build process. And if there's certain aspects that they want you to include or certain layouts that they want you to go for, it's great to understand this to lead your design. Our last preparation discussion is looking at the functionality and purpose. So we've looked at the audience. We are understanding what the stakeholders want the outcome to be. We're talking to the web developers about any of their specific requirements. But we want to understand what the website is actually trying to achieve, what's it trying to do, and what functionality needs to go in place for our design. A clear understanding of the purpose of the website, I believe, is paramount to getting the desired effect as the outcome. Essentially make it work before you make it pretty. I've got an example here for a website where it's a little bit over-engineered in the design, and hopefully that's come up for everybody.
It hasn't.
It hasn't. Okay.
I think that term, make it, what did you say, Matt? Make it work before
Make
you
it work
pretty.
before
It's
you make it
something
pretty.
I hear all the time from the development side of my team when I say, but can't we just add this in? And one particular one of my developers, not Matt, always just goes, I'm going to make it work first. And so I feel the pain of designers who are trying to get things done and web developers are pushing it back. But I think this website really does show you why you shouldn't just go, we're going to make it look great. Drives me mad, this site. Sorry, Matt.
Yes, it's very, very over designed, and I'm not quite sure kind of what I'm really meant to be doing on the website, what's happened once I click something, or where I'm going. I thought it was a restaurant and I'm booking for candles now. So it's kind of quite a wild example of over designing before considering the functionality of the site. I
mean, if I want to go to a restaurant, I want to know what the menu is and how I book it. I don't really care if I can buy a candle from them until I get there.
So you know what it smells like.
I don't know, Christina, but I will look. I will find out if that suits.
Okay, excellent.
I think it's a very good word for that site.
To avoid confusion, we back to make it work before you make it pretty.
Yeah.
Before I go on, wonderful.
You're not sharing your screen again now, though.
So this is understanding how the user interacts with your website. So different kind of websites will have different touch points, different things that they're trying to achieve, whether it's lead generation funnel, key interaction points, like you want to be pushing users towards a job search or a property search, or it could be as simple as a video that you want the user to watch on the website, and that's the goal of the website, is to promote that video. We need to understand those things, and the best way is discussing with the stakeholders, with the web developers, what the key functionality is going to be. A great aspect, or a great tool for setting a foundation for this, once you've made those discussions with the stakeholders, kind of documented that setup, is building a kind of priority foundation layout. It's going to help you highlight how the design is going to facilitate the desired journey of the users moving forward. To explain a little bit about what that kind of looks like, this is a basic example of a priority mapping, which is looking at a lead generation site. So I can see my key here. I've noted a coloration profile for critical to unimportant. And as I'm building my layout, I'm applying to the content aspects on the website where the priorities are going to be for that site. Once I get to this stage for the content, it means that when I come to designing, I can structure my design over the top of this foundation to understand where the primary focus points on the page are going to be. So whether the CTAs I've noted here are going to be as critical, I know that they need to stand out. So I might when I'm designing, build an offset color into all of those CTAs so that they all stand out against the background. The opening text of the website is going to be important. That's my opening message. I don't want the banner to be taking away the attention of the user. So I might implement something like a glass morphism effect over the top of this box, or even putting a filter over the banner to maybe whitewash it and reduce the attention of the user so that the primary aspects of what I'm building for are easily accessible to the user. Setting these up is also really helpful when building on different screen sizes. If I'm building from desktop down, I can look at the content aspects and I know where the important functionality or content aspects are going to be. So I better understand when I move into a mobile which bits can be removed and which bits need to be either increased in size to highlight. This can give a really strong foundation for that process. And it also gives you a solid base to be confidently backing your reasonings for your design with any stakeholders. So if they're questioning why you've put certain colors in certain places, they want to move it around, you can back yourself and say, this is the functionality, this is how the user needs to interact with this website. I would recommend that we go down this road.
And ultimately, Matt, I guess long term, when the website's live and you start implementing things like Hotjar, you want your heat maps to start looking like that design, right? That's
100%. Yeah. Hopefully you'll hit it nail on the head. And your heat maps will look exactly like your priority foundation. Fingers crossed anyway. Finally, looking at designing from our foundation. So we pulled together a couple of kind of trends. They're not necessarily new design aspects, but they are growing in popularity and we believe have some kind of longevity. Consider something like light theme and dark theme, which started as a trend and is now kind of a global usage across usually apps, but websites as well have light themes and dark themes to them. The first one, which might be quite surprising, user-centered designed, which we've kind of discussed throughout, and you might expect to always be practiced, but it's not always been the case, and it is more and more becoming the norm. But it's the idea that websites were built for the company, for yourself, for your shop window, and it's for you, but shifting that perspective and pushing it towards the user. So it's consistently, as this diagram shows, evaluating the requirements and the kind of the functionality foundations that we were looking at, and making sure your design solutions are meeting those requirements at each point. The next one coming in is vibrant gradients. Coming more and more, great for usually more of the arts websites, marketing websites, and tech websites, less so in the professional environments. But these make great backends for websites. You just need to make sure that we're using them in the right places and at the right time, and not taking the intent away from text over the top and things like that. Making sure that they're bold, but not removing, not stopping the customer journey. There is a gradual shift at the moment towards much more vibrant colors and bold colors. There's a couple of tools later which we will look at, which will help with that process. But gradients are great in bringing a website to life, and they don't always have to be so vibrant. So if you're looking at a more professional service sector or emotive care industries, anything like that, you can tone those colors down and go for softer palettes of gradients. The next one is glass morphism. This is a technique used more and more. It's not a new technique, but it's becoming very popular. And it's a way that if you have distracting, vibrant backgrounds to help the content over the top show through and be more prominent. Essentially using a blur filter on backgrounds so that it's breaking up sharp lines in the imagery or design assets behind, so that the text is far more legible. It also helps create very nice depth for the website. It usually goes hand in hand with box shadows and things like that to make it appear that it's separate from the background. Gives a really nice effect. The next one, which I always love, is hand-drawn illustrations. Point note here, they can be very whimsical. So it's often time and place for certain websites, but brands are using it more and more because it provides a bit more of a personal touch for those companies wanting to make connections with their companies. If you're fortunate enough to draw or be able to kind of create these graphics in chosen softwares, it can provide you with a complete unique range of different imagery that you can use on a website. So you're not adherent to kind of stock and iconography that's been used lots of times before. So if you have access to this, it's definitely worth looking into. Next one is variable fonts, or open type fonts referred to. They're fonts that require only a single file type and have much more flexibility in what they can do. So they have different weights to them, they have different styles, they have italics all attached within that one font file, where previously you would have to have multiple font files into the website, which can cause heavy load times. This brings it all into one variable font style that can be controlled via CSS with the web developer. It's been used for quite a long time, but the majority of the shift is towards this. So a lot of the font libraries that are out there will generally be open type fonts and variable fonts, so like FontShare and Google Fonts and Adobe Fonts. For the most part, we'll have variable font types. What is becoming much more popular is the idea that you can animate these fonts. So web developers can use JavaScript and CSS to make these fonts move on the website to create interesting effects. It's excellent because it means that your dynamic range is contained within the content, so the focus is completely kept on the content. So it's very useful for that. So if you have certain headings and titles that you want to promote to people, you can use variable fonts with an idea that they can be made dynamic after the fact to create interesting effects. Next, looking at some of the tools to make your life easier. One of the keys to progressing as designers is our efficiency. We don't want to be rushing the creative bits, so there's some useful tools that we've put here, which will hopefully help you sourcing imagery, testing fonts, things like that, colors more effectively. We find them really helpful. The first one, whilst not really a tool, is the workspaces that you generally work in for web design. Canva is fairly new and is becoming massively popular, especially in kind of the social realm, and can be used for web design as well. Albeit it's not as robust as the other platforms out there, so it's usually simpler simpler websites, but it does have full libraries of assets which are very useful for quickly building out designs to showcase. Adobe Illustrator and Adobe Photoshop. When I used to build, always built in Adobe Photoshop. It does have a cost to it, and there can be a fairly high skill cap for Adobe Photoshop, but it is a very in-depth platform. Gives you lots of customization for building websites in there. And lastly is Figma. Always building Figma at the moment, and would highly recommend it as a web design tool if you're not already using it. It's built primarily for web design, so it allows a lot of the kind of core web development practices to be built in right at the design stage. including global colors and global typography. When we were looking at the brand foundation setups, where we've got all of our colors laid out, all of our typography laid out, that was in Figma, and they can be set up as global styles, so that when you're building your designs, you can match those styles across everything, change things instantly, so you can get completely different colorations in designs, completely different fonts at the flip of a switch, really, which makes it incredibly helpful. It also has what it calls components. So as you're building components, a lot of our web design is built modularly, so that pages can be reconstructed within the CMS after the fact, and pages can be built and moved around. Figma works great for that because we can build components which can then be replicated across different designs, and it will create global components so that you can change one component and it will change throughout your design if you have an update to a single module. So fully recommend Figma there.
Just looking at the chat at the minute, Ellie, quite right. Why we use Photoshop when you could use Adobe XD? Why use Canva when you could use Figma? I think it's very much a personal choice. I think what Matt's tried to do here is give some options for different levels of things that people can use with skill sets. But I think it's entirely up to the designer what you choose to use. There are lots of things out there, but very good point. Why would you use one when there's something that's better? And I think a lot of people don't know what's better and don't know where to look, which is what we're trying to help here as well. Michael is also asking, do you create a sitemap at the development and design stage, Matt?
Yes, always. We tend to create sitemaps before designing anything. Our preferred process, there's pros and cons to both, but when going through the design process, it's often easier to have the content and layouts first. When we are looking at sitemaps, we base them off keyword research as well. So we'll do keyword research mapping documents so that we know where the website should be targeting its audience and use that to support the sitemap creation. So once you have the sitemap, it allows you to better understand what pages are going to be developed for that website, so that when we're doing designs, we can pick out the core pages which are going to have different functionality in them, and build our designs to those core functionality pages. I hope that answers the question.
Quite conscious of time, Matt, and I know you've got quite a few things to run through. Do you want to run through them quite quickly, and then I just want to make sure that we've got some time for some questions and things?
Yes, apologies.
At the end. As I say, you will all get the deck afterwards, and there are links to all of these resources as we go through anyway.
Excellent. So we are in the last section here, looking at the tools. So these are design references and tools, excellent for picking out ideas and references. I won't go into them, but Pinterest we generally all know. Recommend creating accounts on these. They're both free, and it means you can set up things like mood boards. You can be looking through them in your spare time to get reference ideas, and it will help massively when you get to your design stage. Stock content with a lovely stock imagery there. Lipsum or lorem ipsum has been an industry standard since 1500s. So some things never change, and it's excellent for dummy content into websites. These other ones are all kind of image-based content where you can get free stock imagery to drop into your designs if you don't have imagery at that point from the company you're working with or available. So they're very useful for quick and easy enhancing your designs to show what it may look like as an end outcome. Color palettes. Often you're working from brand guidelines, but sometimes you're working from scratch. Color Hunt is great for giving you a series of color palettes that you can utilize. Coolars is really good. It's a palette generator, and you can kind of lock in colors. So if you're looking to expand brand guidelines or anything like that, you can lock in the initial colors and see what's going to work with them. Color contrast is a great one to highlight because this is for accessibility. So this will give a pass mark for different levels of accessibility based on whether the font color and the background color is going to be legible for users. So highly recommend checking that one out. For fonts, FontShare and FontJoy. FontShare is a great open source resource for new fonts. They tend to all be variable fonts, and they've got a really nice structure that you can go in, select fonts and play around with them before deciding what you want to use. Another one to shout out for fonts is obviously Google Fonts, which we use quite a lot. FontJoy is great for checking fonts against each other. So it's built in with a large library of fonts, and it sets up a heading, body, and subheading structure, so you can test them all against each other. It's really good. Vibrant gradients, as I mentioned earlier, gradients are coming very much into fruition. So these are just a couple of tools for getting the color variants to help you in your design. Often in platforms, it's hard going from A to B. You get a lot of faded colors in the middle. This, especially gradient generator, works by moving around the color wheel rather than through it, so you don't get those whites and dulls in the middle. So that's very useful. And lastly, these are a couple of global resources. The first one, for all of kind of the color and font setups, it's got multiple tools within it that is archived, so you can utilize that to find new tools, and that's really useful. The last one is an AI tool. I know it's the first time I've mentioned AI in this podcast, but in this webinar rather. But AI is definitely a whole other webinar. I just wanted to highlight this tool because AI is coming into fruition. There's probably an AI for that, so you can guess what it does. You search what you're looking for, and it will provide a potential AI tool for that. And then looking at time, I'm gonna skip through the key takeaways, but we've got preparing to design is key. We had building our functional perspective. Trends are important, but not everything. And you're not alone. There are loads of tools to help you improve your efficiency.
Amazing.
Good questions.
Thank you, Matt. I know we've run through some questions that have come through in the chat as we've been going along. I've also had a couple come through to me just privately. One of them was around AI, kind of, can we use some AI for that? So I think I knew that was going to be answered at the end. That is, AI is going to be massive in design and development. It already is. People have been using, AI for coding and things for a long time, but there will be another webinar on it at some point, I'm sure. I know the team here use AI a lot already. It's great for content generation in terms of videos and things like that. So we will do something else on that separately. The other thing that I had come through, Matt, is just, do I actually need to do this? Can I use a template? What's your thoughts? What's your thoughts on using like predefined templates for building websites rather than going through your own design journey?
So you definitely can, and I think it all depends on the requirements of the stakeholders that you're building for. Templates can make things extremely efficient, and can help you get things in the right place quickly. I think we don't use templates because we go very much via a custom design process for the most part, where we can code kind of exactly what we design. So we, for design purposes, avoid templates for the most part. But I see no reason why you can't use them. As I said before, a lot of the websites follow similar structures. So having a base template that you can build from is often a really good idea. It would be worth, once you've kind of utilized that template, you've made it your own, is making sure as you're designing things, you're storing those things that you're designing, maybe even breaking them down to their basic level so that you can use those structures moving forward for different designs. So you almost have your own templates that you can then work from.
A bit pros and cons of both, really. All right. Yeah. Brilliant. JT in the chat there, you use GitHub Copilot every day. Feel yourself, guys. Yeah, that's what I mean. AI has been around for so long in that.
it helps.
Brilliant. So we are just running out over time. Thank you for bearing with us with the technical difficulties there at the beginning. I just want to mention, Matt, if you want to jump onto the next slide, our next webinar that's going to be coming up on the 23rd of May. That's going to be with our digital marketing manager, Charlotte, where we're going to be talking about digital PR and how you can use that within your business to basically create some free promotions. So Charlotte's been doing some great work with our clients recently to get some free promotions in the likes of the Mirror and the Sun Online and things like that. So it's going to be a really good session. She's going to give a lot of tips in there as well. But all I want to say now is thank you very much, all of you, for your time today. Thank you for bearing with us at the beginning. We hope you found it useful, and we will send everything over to you in the next couple of days. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, everybody.
Bye-bye.